Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human research and written material.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine your company is just suddenly bleeding cash, like your entire executive team has just been hospitalized and your fiercest competitors are literally battering down the doors to your office with sledgehammers.
Just a completely normal Tuesday, right?
Right, exactly. But seriously, your life's work is collapsing in real time. Do you, cut your losses, liquidate everything, and run for the fire escape, or do you stand your ground and bleed?
It's a huge question.
It really is. And today we're dropping into the bloodiest, most desperate sequence of the Trojan War. This is a deep dive into books 11 through 14 of Homer's Iliad. And the mission here is to figure out how human beings actually respond when the structural walls of their lives just completely crumble.
Yeah, and that analogy you just used is perfect because the situation facing the Greeks right now is it's a total unprecedented systemic collapse.
Set the stage for us a bit. Where are we?
Right. So just to anchor us in the historical and human context, this is the 28th day of the poem's action. The Greeks are backed all the way up against their ships on the beach.
Like they have nowhere else to go.
Exactly. Their massive protective wall, which, they built with immense backbreaking effort, is failing. And their greatest warrior, Achilles, is still just pouting in his tent. He's refusing to fight over an insult to his honor.
Which is just so frustrating to read.
Oh, it's infuriating. And above all of this, you have the gods actively and honestly pretty pettily manipulating the battlefield. The stakes literally could not be higher here. If the Trojans breach the ships, the Greeks don't just lose the war.
They lose their ride home.
Yes. They will be slaughtered on the sand to the last man. It is pure desperation.
And Homer doesn't start this section with, a slow build either. He kicks off book 11 with this incredible burst of adrenaline.
He really does.
Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief, arms himself for battle. And the text spends this huge amount of time detailing his armor. It's not just a sword and a shield, right? It's a spectacle.
Oh, the optics are everything in this scene.
Yeah, Homer describes his cuirass, his breastplate, as this gift from the king of Cyprus. It's made of 10 bands of dark enamel, 12 of gold, 20 of tin, and it has these 3 glittering metallic dragons arching up toward his neck.
Which is just a stunning visual. It's heavy metal, literally.
Right. And then there's his shield, which has the Gorgon on it. And for anyone who doesn't know, the Gorgon is this mythological monster, like Medusa, whose gaze turns people to stone.
Right, so having that on your shield isn't just for protection, it's psychological warfare.
Exactly. It's meant to project absolute paralyzing authority. I mean, he looks invincible.
He really does.
Yeah.
And in modern terms, it's the Bronze Age equivalent of a commander stepping out of a Black Hawk helicopter in full tactical gear. Or, a CEO putting on a bespoke multi-$1,000 suit before the most hostile board meeting of their life.
Just dressing for the war you're in.
Precisely. It is the pure optics of leadership.
Yeah.
Agamemnon is projecting power because he desperately needs the men to believe in the chain of command. And, for a fleeting moment, it actually works.
He has a really good run for a second there.
He does. He has what the Greeks called an aristeia, which is his moment of supreme excellence in battle. He fights brilliantly. He pushes the Trojans back. He is essentially a one-man wrecking ball.
But then, and this is where it gets, the reality of the battlefield catches up to the optics. Things just fall apart at a terrifying speed.
Systemic failure.
Right. The structural integrity of the Greek leadership is systematically dismantled. Agamemnon gets wounded by a spear to his arm. He tries to fight through it, but, the adrenaline wears off.
The pain becomes blinding.
Yeah, and he is forced to flee the field in his chariot. And then it's like dominoes. Diomedes, one of their greatest fighters, is pinned to the ground by an arrow through his foot. Ulysses is surrounded. He's stabbed completely through his shield and armor. It bears his ribs to the bone, and he barely escapes. But wait, I want to pause right here because we can't overlook the most devastating casualty of this sequence.
Machaon.
Yes, Machaon. He gets shot by an arrow. And Machaon isn't just another guy with a sword. He is the physician.
The son of Asclepius, the god of medicine.
Exactly. So if he goes down, they don't just lose a fighter, right? They lose their entire ability to recover. So my question is this the specific domino that pushes the Greek leadership over the edge into total panic?
It absolutely is. I mean, it's a logistical nightmare. In ancient warfare, the physician is this highly prized aristocratic asset. They know how to extract barbed arrowheads, suck out venom, apply, yarrow and soothing herbs to stop catastrophic bleeding.
So he's essentially the whole hospital.
Right. When the chief medical officer is bleeding in the dirt, the psychological safety net of the entire army just vanishes. So you have the commander, the bravest fighters, and the lead physician all taken off the board.
And the Greek wall is breached.
Exactly. The Trojans are pouring through. It's a macro-level crisis.
So the walls have literally and metaphorically broken. And when we look at how Agamemnon, the commander, responds to this, he completely loses his nerve.
He really does.
He looks at the carnage, he looks at his bleeding arm, and he proposes what can only be described as a disastrous plan. He tells the surviving leadership, let's drag the ships into the water, wait for the cover of night, and flee. He wants to abandon the whole siege.
It's a moment of utter despair for him.
But here is my question, and I want to look at this from a different angle for a second, just to challenge the text. If you strip away the romantic idea of heroic glory, isn't Agamemnon just practicing standard emergency room triage here?
How do you mean?
Well, the patient is coding, the resources are gone, the Greeks are losing. So why is Ulysses so outraged by the idea of packing up and living to fight another day? Why is Agamemnon's pragmatism viewed by the others as this massive failure of leadership?
That is a brilliant question. And it really requires us to exercise some serious wisdom with discernment here. Because on paper, a spreadsheet might tell you Agamemnon is right.
Right. Cut your losses.
Exactly. But Ulysses understands a fundamental mechanic of human psychology that Agamemnon, who is just blinded by his own pain and panic, has totally forgotten. Ulysses delivers this brutal, almost insubordinate rebuke to the commander-in-chief.
Oh, he holds absolutely nothing back.
None at all. He tells Agamemnon his words are shameful, cowardly, and unkingly, because Ulysses knows that in a true crisis, the posture of the leader dictates the survival of the group.
The posture.
Yeah, the posture. If the commanders start dragging the heavy ships down to the surf to retreat, the exhausted troops fighting on the front lines will hear the grinding of the hulls. They will look back, see their leaders packing up, and they will instantaneously lose all morale.
Oh, wow.
They will drop their weapons and be slaughtered right there in the sand. So Ulysses recognizes that pragmatism in a vacuum, like a pragmatism devoid of an understanding of human emotion and morale, is actually a death sentence.
It reminds me of a pilot in a nosediving airplane. Even if the instruments say the plane is going down, the pilot cannot get on the intercom and scream, "We are all going to die."
Right, that helps no one.
Because the moment the leader panics, the cabin erupts into chaos, and any slim chance of recovery is instantly vaporized. Your fear as a leader is a highly contagious pathogen.
That is precisely it. And that brings us to the brilliantly counterintuitive solution proposed by Diomedes.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, so remember, Diomedes has an arrow wound through his foot. He can barely stand. But he says to Agamemnon and Ulysses, look, we are wounded, we cannot swing a sword, we cannot physically fight, but we must go to the front lines anyway.
Even though they can't fight.
Right, not to engage in combat, but just to be seen, to stand just out of range of the spears and project presence.
Just to be seen, even when they are literally bleeding.
Yes, it is a profound lesson in leadership endurance. Diomedes is introducing this concept of the wounded presence. He is saying that sometimes your physical capability to do the work is totally gone. You're injured, you're exhausted, your resources are depleted. But your presence still carries immense structural weight.
That is so powerful.
So they literally use their spears as walking sticks, and they limp out to the front.
I want you to think about what that means for your own life right now. Because what is your wounded presence? When you are completely burned out, when you are emotionally exhausted or facing a massive personal deficit, how can simply showing up at the front lines change the outcome?
It changes everything.
It really does. Like, maybe you are going through a brutal season and you can't be the one to single-handedly execute the major project at work. Or maybe you're dealing with an illness and you can't be the energetic parent running around the yard.
Right, you just don't have the capacity.
But you can still sit on the porch. You can still sit in the back of the meeting room. You can let your team or your family see that you have not abandoned them.
It is deeply reassuring. To use a different analogy, it's like a veteran firefighter who has a broken arm but insists on standing at the incident command post.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, he can't hold a hose, but his very presence, his calm demeanor, stabilizes the entire battalion. The visibility of your commitment often matters far more to your team's survival than your actual tactical output in that moment.
That is such a heavy, practical truth. Now, I want to transition across the battlefield. Because while the Greek leadership is struggling with the crisis of failure and physical wounds, The Trojan leadership is dealing with a totally different disease, right?
Oh, a completely different disease.
It's the blinding intoxication of success.
The contrast is striking. The Trojans have pushed the Greeks all the way back to their fortified ditch. They are high on adrenaline and the scent of victory. But this ditch is a logistical nightmare.
It's not just a little trench.
No, Homer describes it in vivid detail. It is wide, it's steep, and it's lined with dense, sharpened wooden stakes that are designed specifically to impale horses and men.
It's an anti-tank trench, basically.
Exactly. And in Book 12, we meet a character named Polydamas. Now, Polydamas is Hector's brother-in-arms, but he operates as the wise, analytical, almost data-driven advisor to the Trojans.
He's the guy looking at the numbers.
Right. He looks at this ditch and immediately does the logistical math. He tells Hector and the commanders, look, we cannot drive our chariots through this. The axles will get wedged in the narrow trench, the horses will be impaled on the stakes, and if the Greeks counterattack while we are stuck in the ditch, it will be a bloodbath.
Which makes perfect sense.
He says, we need to leave the horses and chariots behind on the edge of the ditch, form up into tight infantry columns, and proceed on foot.
It is a brilliant, objective, data-driven strategy based purely on the reality of the terrain. He is looking at the physics of a chariot and the physics of a ditch and saying, this does not work.
And most of the Trojan leaders actually listen. They recognize the reality of the terrain.
Oh.
But there's always one who believes the laws of physics don't apply to him because he's just that special. His name is Asius. And Asius ignores the advice completely. He's so proud of his massive, powerful horses, his vaunted coursers, as Homer calls them, and his glorious chariot, that he decides to charge the Greek gates at full speed anyway.
And it goes exactly as poorly as Polydamas predicted, right?
Actually, it goes worse. Asius charges a section of the gate that has been left open, thinking he could just blow right through. But waiting for him are two massive Greek warriors, Polypodes and Leontius.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they are Lapiths, which is a fiercely strong tribe. Homer describes them standing before the gates like twin giant oak trees that have driven their roots deep into the mountainside, weathering wind and rain for centuries.
What an image.
Asius hits this immovable wall, his men are slaughtered, his chariot assault fails completely, and Asius ends up slapping his thighs in frustration, cursing the heavens because reality refused to bend to his ego.
It's like a mountain climber ignoring a severe storm warning because they have summit fever.
Yes, exactly.
They are so close to the top, and their ego is screaming at them to push forward, so they ignore the plummeting barometer and march their entire expedition into a fatal blizzard.
It's dangerous.
But here's where this gets incredibly interesting, because Homer escalates the warning. Right after Asius fails, as Hector and the main Trojan force are preparing to assault the wall on foot, a massive cosmic omen occurs.
It is one of the most vivid set pieces in the entire epic. So, an eagle appears in the sky, flying high over the Trojan army.
Yeah.
And in its talons, it is clutching a massive blood-red serpent.
Okay.
But the serpent isn't dead. It curls its head upward and bites the eagle viciously right in the throat. The eagle, shrieking in pain from the venom, drops the bleeding serpent right into the middle of the Trojan army and flies away screaming on the wind.
It's a completely terrifying visual to drop out of the sky onto thousands of superstitious soldiers.
Yeah.
Now, we have to understand that in ancient Greece, augury, reading the flight of birds wasn't just a mystical parlor trick.
No, not at all. It was their version of data science and meteorology combined. Birds were considered the direct messengers of Zeus. A bird appearing on the right, which is the east where the sun rises, was auspicious. A bird on the left, the west, the setting sun, was a bad omen. This eagle dropping a bloody snake was a clear divine communication.
And Polydamas, our resident data analyst, steps up again to interpret this.
He does.
He reads the data of the omen. He goes to Hector and says, Hector, this is a clear warning. Think about what we just saw. The eagle caught the serpent just like we were about to catch the Greek camp. But the eagle couldn't keep it. It got bitten, and it had to drop its prize and fly away in pain. If we breach this wall today, we are going to get bitten. We will suffer heavy losses, and we will be forced to drop our prize and retreat in agony.
It's so logical.
Right. So he advises a strategic pause. He says, do not attack the ships today.
Polydamas is offering a master class in risk assessment here. He is looking at the empirical evidence, which in their context is the omen, and he is saying, the cost of this acquisition is too high. The asset is toxic. If we push this, the blowback will cripple us.
But Hector, he gives a response that has echoed through the centuries. It's one of the most famous quotes in Western literature.
It really is.
He looks at Polydamas with absolute disdain and says, Without a sign his sword the brave man draws, and asks no omen but his country's cause.
It is a stunning line of poetry. I mean, it stirs the blood. It sounds incredibly noble.
It absolutely does. I mean, if we were watching this in a movie theater today, this is the exact moment the orchestral music swells, and we all cheer for the visionary maverick who is ignoring the cautious, bean-counting haters to follow his heart.
Oh, for sure.
We are culturally conditioned to love that narrative. Follow your gut. Ignore the odds. Be the hero. But Homer is doing something much more complex and warning us here, isn't he?
He is. And this is a massive obstacle to growth for modern readers, because Hector's response sounds so right to our modern ears. But we must exercise strict discernment here. Hector is wrong.
He is dead wrong.
Literally and figuratively. The omen was completely accurate. Polydamas's interpretation was flawless. Hector's response is not actually bravery. It is the epitome of toxic positivity and blinding hubris.
Wow, toxic positivity.
Yeah, because Hector has been winning for 24 hours straight. He is so intoxicated by his recent string of victories that he genuinely believes he is immune to the fundamental laws of cause and effect. He is high on his own supply.
He even attacks Polydamas personally. He accuses him of cowardice and threatens to kill him if he spreads his cold poison of fear among the troops.
Which is the ultimate red flag of a toxic leader.
Oh, absolutely.
When an advisor brings you objective data that contradicts your desires, and your response is to attack the advisor's character and threaten their livelihood, you are in deep, dangerous waters. Hector's ego wants the absolute victory so badly that he's willing to march his entire army into a meat grinder just to prove that his willpower is stronger than fate.
I want you to think about how often we do this in our own lives. When are you being a heroic visionary, and when are you just blindly ignoring the bleeding serpent dropping right in front of your face because your ego wants the win?
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you ignoring the terrible market research for your new business idea? Are you ignoring the glaring red flags in a relationship that all your friends are pointing out? Are you ignoring the warning signs in your own health because you are addicted to the momentum of your own narrative?
Yeah.
It is terrifyingly easy to dress up our own stubborn hubris in the heroic costume of courage.
It is a very dangerous costume to wear. Because, as the Iliad brutally shows us in the chapters to come, reality always wins in the end. You can ignore the data, you can threaten the messenger, but the serpent will still bite you.
Okay, so we've looked at the failure of leadership in crisis with Agamemnon and the failure of leadership in success with Hector. Now we need to transition to the underlying philosophy of this entire war.
The big picture.
Right. Because since we're talking about why people like Hector or Diomedes are out there risking everything in the mud and the blood, we have to look at the foundational agreement of their society. As the Trojans are battering at the Greek wall, we get what might be the greatest speech on duty in the entire epic.
Yes. We're speaking, of course, of the dialogue between Sarpedon and Glaucus in Book 12.
Give us the background on these two.
So, Sarpedon is a son of Zeus, and he's a king of Lycia, which is a region in modern-day Turkey. He has brought his army to fight as an ally to Troy. He is standing at the ditch watching the chaos, the death, the absolute horror of the battle, and he turns to his friend and second-in-command, Glaucus, and delivers this staggering philosophy on the nature of their existence and the price of their privilege.
I actually want to read a bit of this text using Alexander Pope's famous translation because we really need to hear the actual moral arithmetic Sarpedon is doing here.
It's beautiful.
It is. He asks Glaucus, "Why boast we, Glaucus, our extended reign, where Xanthus' streams enrich the Lycian plain, our numerous herds that range the fruitful field, and hills where vines their purple harvest yield? Why on those shores are we with joy surveyed, admired as heroes and as gods obeyed?"
Notice what he's doing here. He is taking a deeply honest inventory of their immense privilege.
Yeah, he really is.
He is listing the best cuts of meat at the banquets, the finest wine, the reverence of the common people, the massive fertile estates they hold back home in Lycia. He is asking the fundamental question that every person of privilege should ask: why do we have this?
And his answer is so convicting. He says, it's not because we are inherently better people. It's not because we have better DNA. He says, we have these things so that when war comes, when the fire is hottest, we are expected to stand at the very front of the battle line. He says, the life which others pay, let us bestow.
This is the core wisdom of this section. He is defining the concept that would later be called noblesse or placer. The idea that nobility, wealth, or power inherently demands the assumption of the greatest risks and responsibility.
Right.
To understand this, we have to understand two Greek concepts. There's time, pronounced time, which is the physical manifestation of honor, like wealth and land. And there's kleos, which is immortal glory. Sarpedon understands that his time, his wealth, is not a static right.
It's not just a gift.
No, it is a heavy, bloody debt owed to his people. His privilege in peacetime is the prepayment for his sacrifice in wartime. When his soldiers see him fighting in the most dangerous part of the breach, they will say, "Such, they may cry, deserve the sovereign state, whom those that envy dare not imitate."
He is saying we have to prove we are worth the food we eat. So let's translate this to our reality. What does this mean for us today? Because modern privilege rarely operates on this logic.
It definitely doesn't.
Today, the corner office, the massive stock options, the inherited wealth, the political power, these things are overwhelmingly viewed as endpoints. They are the reward for being smart or working hard or, frankly, just being born lucky.
Yes, and Sarpedon's speech radically challenges that modern assumption.
Yeah.
It asks us to view our advantages not as static rewards, but as active obligations.
Right.
If we use the analogy of a ship in a storm, Sarpedon is arguing that if you are the captain, enjoying the largest cabin and the best meals on sunny days, when the ship hits an iceberg, you don't get the first lifeboat. You are the one who goes down into the freezing water to patch the hull.
Exactly. Or consider a politician. If a political leader votes to send a nation into a war, this ancient logic would demand that the politician's own children be the first ones deployed to the front line.
Which is wild to think about today.
It completely inverts the modern instinct of the powerful, which is to use their wealth and status to shield themselves from consequence while exposing the vulnerable to the risk. Sarpedon says, no, if you eat the meat, you catch the spear.
And we can draw a profound comparative insight here with Stoic philosophy, which developed centuries later but shares this exact DNA regarding mortality.
Oh, how so?
Sarpedon tells Glaucus that if they could live forever, if they were immortal like the gods, he wouldn't urge his friend into this bloody war. He wouldn't care about glory because they would have infinite time. But he says, since, alas, ignoble age must come, disease and death's inexorable doom, since we're all going to die anyway, we must define our finite lives by our actions.
The life which others pay, let us bestow, and give to fame what we to nature owe. Since we owe nature our death eventually, let's spend our lives on something meaningful now. That gives me chills.
It is a stark confrontation with mortality. Now, modern listeners might face an obstacle to growth here. We often resist this idea of finding glory in death.
Yeah, it feels a bit intense for a modern audience.
Right. It feels archaic, deeply militaristic, and uncomfortable. But stripped of its Bronze Age martial context, this is really about finding meaning in our finite existence. It's about realizing that since your time is limited, the only thing of true value you can create is a legacy of responsibility and courage in service to others.
I want you to look at your own life right now. Inventory your personal leisure. What are the privileges, the advantages, the comfortable salaries, the social capital, or the safe neighborhoods you enjoy? Take a hard look at them. And then ask yourself, what front line are you obligated to stand on to earn them?
That's a powerful reflection.
Where is the danger, the conflict, or the heavy burden in your community or your workplace that you are supposed to be shouldering in exchange for that comfort? Because if you are eating the meat but hiding from the spear, you are violating the most ancient and sacred social contract.
It is a sobering reflection. And as we watch Sarpedon and the Trojans violently force the wall, tearing down the battlements with their bare hands while men die in the mud, we realize the sheer weight of these human decisions. But this brings us to a wildly different perspective.
Right, because we have to look up.
Yes. Because while the mortals are locked in this heavy moral arithmetic, bleeding and dying for duty and honor, there's an entirely different war happening above the clouds.
And this is where the epic takes a massive, almost comedic, but deeply tragic pivot. While mortals are dealing with real consequences, the gods are playing a completely different game, a game of elaborate deception and distraction that decides the fate of the mortals below. Let's talk about the wildest scene in Book 14, the seduction of Zeus, or Jupiter, on Mount Ida.
The contrast is intentionally jarring. Below, men are dying for honor. Above, the gods are engaging in a soap opera of manipulation.
So what's the setup here?
The context is that Jupiter Zeus has been actively helping the Trojans, keeping a promise he made to Achilles' mother. Juno Hera, his wife, fiercely favors the Greeks and is desperate to save them from being slaughtered at the ships. But she knows she cannot overpower Jupiter by force. His will is absolute. He is the king of the gods.
Right. If she fights him directly, she loses. So she decides she has to hack his attention. And this entire sequence is a masterclass in cognitive manipulation. Juno doesn't just ask him to change his mind. She orchestrates this incredibly elaborate, multi-sensory seduction to completely derail his executive function.
It is incredibly detailed.
Homer gives us this lush description of her preparation. She goes to her divine chambers, cleanses herself with ambrosia, anoints her body with fragrant, immortal oil that perfumes the entire heaven and earth, and puts on a divine dress.
But the dress and the perfume aren't enough. She needs a weapon. So she goes to Venus Aphrodite, who is technically on the opposing side of the war, supporting the Trojans. Juno lies to Venus, saying she needs help rekindling the romance of some older gods, and asks to borrow her magic girdle, the Cestus.
We really need to define the Cestus, because it's not just a pretty belt. It is essentially a physical garment woven with pure psychological manipulation.
That is exactly what it is. Homer says the Cestus is embroidered with every art and every charm to win the wisest and the coldest warm. It contains fond love, the gentle vow, the gay desire, the kind deceit, persuasive speech, silence that spoke, and eloquence of eyes.
Wow.
It is the physical embodiment of irresistible allure and sensory hijack. It's designed to bypass the rational brain entirely.
It's the ultimate algorithmic feed designed to hack your dopamine receptor.
Yes, exactly.
But Juno doesn't stop there. She has the attraction, but she needs him completely incapacitated. She travels to Lemnos to find Somnus, the god of sleep. She tells Sleep, I need you to knock Jupiter out the moment I seduce him. And Sleep is terrified.
Oh, he is terrified.
He says, absolutely not. Last time I put him to sleep so you could scheme, he woke up, flew into a rage, and literally threw gods out of heaven. I barely escaped with my life.
Sleep is deeply traumatized by Jupiter's wrath.
Exactly, so Juno has to bribe him. And what does she offer? Not gold, not a throne. She offers him the one thing he desperately wants. Pasitoi, the youngest and most beautiful of the Graces, to be his wife. Sleep makes her swear a binding oath on the river Styx, and then he agrees to the plot. He turns into a bird and hides in a pine tree in Mount Ida, waiting for his moment.
It is a calculated, multifaceted attack on Jupiter's executive function. She used desire, sensory overload, and the promise of rest to completely blind him to the reality of the war.
And it works perfectly.
It does. She finds him on Mount Ida, and the moment he sees her wearing the cestus, he is instantly ravished.
Yeah.
His rational mind shuts down. He even gives this incredibly comedic, deeply ironic speech where he lists all of his past infidelities. He names all these mortal women he's slept with, just to tell Juno how much more he desires her right now than any of them.
Which is a terrible romantic strategy, by the way.
Terribly awkward.
Yeah.
But it shows how completely his higher reasoning has short-circuited.
I have to use an analogy here because the absurdity of this is amazing. It's like a person freezing to death in the wilderness.
Okay, how so?
Well, when hypothermia sets in, right before the end, the victim often experiences a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. They suddenly feel burning hot and they feel this overwhelming, peaceful desire to just lie down in the snow and go to sleep. It feels like ultimate comfort, but it is actually the final stage of their vital organs shutting down. Jupiter is experiencing a divine version of this. He feels ultimate comfort and desire, but his critical function as the ruler of the universe is shutting down.
Yes. Jupiter's focus is put to sleep. And Homer describes the Earth literally sprouting a thick bed of fresh lotus, crocus, and hyacinth beneath them to cushion their rest. A golden cloud covers them. It is beautiful, but it is a catastrophic lapse in leadership.
Because what happens down below?
Because the moment Jupiter falls asleep, the macro-level war changes. Sleep rushes down to the ships and tells Neptune Poseidon, the god of the sea, Zeus is asleep. Go.
And Neptune doesn't hesitate. He rushes in, rallies the failing Greeks, and the entire tide of the war turns in an instant. Hector, the unstoppable force of Troy who just breached the wall, gets crushed in the chest by a massive boulder thrown by the Greek hero Ajax.
It's a huge turning point.
Hector is vomiting blood, he's carried off the field, and the Trojans are routed. All because the CEO of the cosmos was asleep at the wheel. The entire fate of thousands of men hinged on a single lapse in focus by the one in charge.
If we translate this to our modern lives, the core wisdom is recognizing that we are surrounded by forces actively trying to hack our attention. The Cestus of Venus today isn't a magical belt. It is the supercomputer in your pocket.
Oh, absolutely.
It is the infinite scroll, the tailored algorithm, the dopamine hit of social media, the allure of constant, frictionless comfort. These things are literally engineered with persuasive speech and kind deceit to pull your eyes away from your actual responsibilities.
So, identify your personal Cestus. What is the specific, irresistible distraction that takes your eye off your most critical goals? Is it doom-scrolling political outrage? Is it the pursuit of a luxury or a hobby that you are using to avoid dealing with your failing business or your struggling marriage?
Those are the real threats.
When you allow your executive function to be seduced and put to sleep, you leave your troops, your family, your career, your mental health completely vulnerable to disaster.
You have to ask yourself, while you are comfortable on your metaphorical Mount Ida, shielded by a golden cloud of distraction, what boulders are crushing your goals down on the battlefield? We cannot afford to be naive about the forces that seek to distract us. We must guard our focus as fiercely as we would guard a fortress, because the macro consequences of our micro lapses in attention can be devastating.
That is such a vivid warning. Now, Jupiter's lapse in focus changed the macro-level war, but let's descend from the heights of Mount Ida back into the mud of the Greek camp for our final section today.
The micro level.
Right. Because down on the ground, we have an incredible example of how a micro-level conversation, just two guys in a tent, manages to set in motion the single most important event of the entire Trojan War.
We're jumping back slightly chronologically to Book 11 to look at the power of the mentor and the ripple effect of action. We are looking at the character of Nestor.
Set the scene for us.
Let's set the scene. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, has been sitting out the battle. But he is not entirely apathetic. He is standing on the stern of his massive ship, watching the disaster unfold. He sees a wounded man being carried off the field in a chariot. A tiny sliver of pity touches Achilles' heart, and he sends his closest friend and companion, Patroclus, to run to the tents and see who was wounded.
Patroclus goes to the tent and he discovers that the wounded man is Machaon, the physician we talked about earlier. But Patroclus also runs into Nestor. Now, Nestor is the king of Pylos. He is the oldest Greek commander. He has outlived 2 generations of men.
He's seen it all.
Yeah, he is too old to fight effectively in the vanguard anymore. But he is an absolute surgical master of human psychology. Patroclus says, "I'm in a hurry. Achilles is waiting for an answer. Who is the wounded man? I need to go." But Nestor doesn't just answer the question and let him leave. He traps him in a conversation.
He makes Patroclus sit down. A captive woman named Hecamede mixes the Makaikion, which is a medicinal ancient potion made of Pramnian wine, grated goat's cheese, and barley flour.
Which sounds intense.
It's like an ancient, heavy restorative Gatorade. Nestor has this massive golden cup that only he can easily lift, establishing his underlying strength. And as they drink, Nestor begins to talk.
And he talks and he talks.
Oh, he does.
He launches into this massive, sprawling story about his own youthful glories. He talks about a war with the Epeans, a neighboring tribe back in Greece. He goes into excruciating detail about a cattle raid from 50 years ago. He talks about stealing 50 herds of swine, 50 flocks of sheep, and striking down the enemy king's son. Now, to a modern reader, it can feel like a frustrating tangent. The Greek ships are literally about to burn, men are dying outside the tent, and this old man is rambling about stealing sheep half a century ago.
It seems like senility, honestly, but it is actually profound strategy.
Okay, unpack that.
Nestor is doing something incredibly calculated. He knows exactly who Patroclus is, and he knows exactly what Patroclus means to Achilles. By telling this story, Nestor's establishing his own authority. He is painting a vivid picture of what a true hero does in their prime. They act, they protect their people, they win Clio's glory.
Oh.
By recounting his own youthful vigor and how he saved his people when they were desperate, he is implicitly shaming the current generation, specifically Achilles, for their inaction. He is holding up a mirror of ancient glory to highlight their present cowardice.
He literally says, Achilles with unactive fury glows and gives to passion what to Greece he owes. He is saying Achilles is wasting his potential on a petty grudge. And then, after he has primed Patroclus with this tale of duty and action, after he has activated Patroclus' deep sense of Greek shame and honor, he drops the seed that will change everything.
He says to Patroclus, "If Achilles is bound by some prophecy, or if he is just too stubborn to fight, then you need to act. You are his closest friend. Ask to borrow his armor. If you lead his troops into battle wearing Achilles' armor, the Trojans will think the great Achilles has returned. They will panic, they will retreat, and Greece will breathe again."
It is the inception of the most pivotal idea in the epic. Nestor knows he cannot physically save the army. His limbs are slow, his strength is fading, but his influence is as sharp as a spear.
Absolutely.
This is a profound translation for us. You don't always have to be the one swinging the sword to change the course of history. Being the elder statesman, the mentor who gives the right advice, or poses the exact right challenge at the right moment, is an incredibly powerful form of leadership.
The ripple effect of this single conversation in a tent over a cup of wine is staggering. Because Patroclus takes this advice. He goes back to Achilles crying for the Greeks. He puts on the armor. He drives the Trojans back from the ships. But then he is killed by Hector. And Patroclus' death is the only thing that finally breaks Achilles' pride, brings him back into the war in a homicidal rage, and ultimately dooms the city of Troy. Nestor's words, carefully spoken to the right person at the right time, effectively burn down an entire civilization.
However, we really must look at this with clear eyes, because there is a very dark side to this mentorship. Nestor is effectively using nostalgia, shame, and guilt to manipulate Patroclus into what is essentially a suicide mission.
Yes.
Patroclus is famously a gentle soul. He is the healer. He is the one moved to tears by the suffering of his friends. Nestor knows this, and he weaponizes that empathy.
It is a masterclass in manipulation. It is highly effective, but ethically it is deeply complicated.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask a difficult question about the nature of guidance and influence. When you are mentoring someone, when you are pushing a younger colleague, a student, or even your own child to take on a massive challenge, whose glory are you truly serving?
Oof, that's a hard question.
Are you guiding them toward their own self-actualization and well-being? Or are you using them as an instrument to achieve your own goals, regardless of the cost of them?
Are you sending them into a battle you just want to see won, but don't want to fight yourself? Think about your own network of influence right now. Who is the Patroclus in your life? Who is that person with raw potential, maybe with a gentle, willing heart, who you are trying to inspire to put on the armor and step into the fray?
It's important to reflect on.
It is a beautiful thing to empower someone, but you must ruthlessly check your motives. Are you preparing them for the reality of the battle, giving them the tools they need to survive, or are you manipulating their loyalty to fight a war you are no longer able to fight yourself? Mentorship is a sacred trust, and Nestor shows us both its world-changing power and its potential for devastating exploitation.
It is a profound responsibility. The words we speak into the lives of those who look up to us have a trajectory that we can rarely foresee. Nestor planted a seed that saved the Greek fleet, but it cost a gentleman his life. And it unleashed a grief in Achilles that shook the foundations of their world.
As we step back and look at this vast tapestry of blood, ego, duty, and distraction that we've unspooled today across these 4 books of the Iliad, there is a final provocative thought I want to leave you with.
What's that?
Notice the incredible interplay between macro forces and micro decisions. The gods are scheming on mountaintops, dropping sleep and panic and courage like massive weather systems onto the mortals below. The macro forces are overwhelming and entirely out of the human's control. Yet, despite all of that cosmic manipulation, the actual outcome of the war still hinges on micro-level human action.
That's so true.
It hinges on a single human picking up a boulder, like Ajax. It hinges on a single leader deciding to ignore an omen and push forward, like Hector. It hinges on a wounded commander choosing to limp to the front lines just to be seen. It hinges on one friend listening to an old man's story in a tent. You may not control the cosmic forces of your life. You don't control the algorithms, the shifting economic markets, the weather, or the sudden catastrophic emergencies. The macro weather will do what it does. But you always control whether you throw the stone. You control whether you heed the warning. And you control whether you show up to the front lines when your people need you.
The micro-level choices matter.
They matter more than anything. That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.